All right, if we could come find our seats, we're going to keep going here. You don't want to know how many slides are left. Sorry. You okay? We okay? We still friends? Good. All right, great. Okay, so let's move into the next question. Why? Did I do that? Or did you do that? I did that? All right, good. All right. What is absolute? What is really real? All right, so going back to Daniel, and we are now going to spend a lot more time because you're thinking we are never getting through a chapter and a half at this rate. Speed up, dude. Well, here's one more verse. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. Now, it would be a trick question if I were to ask you, is that the part about the vessels, is that history or theological history? It would be a bit of a trick because the answer is yes. Because he is telling us what happened, and if you are unfamiliar with the rest of the book of Daniel, you would say, well, there's nothing else there. Well, that's not true. In these vessels, we're going to find the entire downfall of the Babylonian Empire. Cups. The Babylonian Empire is going to fall because of cups. Right? So Daniel is laying out two very important issues. Who or what is behind human history? And now he's asking what is real? What is absolute? Now, there's a couple different ways we could ask that question. Philosophically, one of the things that we could ask is, what is the makeup of prime reality? So that's kind of the nerdy philosophical way of asking it. That's what I force my students to think through. You don't have to do that, but that's a way of asking it. So a question like that is asking, is it possible for certain things to have certain value? And if so, where do they come from? And immediately, if you're thinking along with me, you might stop and consider, well, it isn't possible in the church age, theologically speaking, to have a cup, a vessel, a vase that is holy. You would be right. In the church age, there's one entity in the universe that can be Christian or not. It is a person. So technically speaking, please don't get angry with me. There is no such thing as a Christian school. There is no such thing as a Christian college. There is no such thing as a Christian radio station. And there's barely any such thing as a Christian bookstore anymore. Right? Now, I say that tongue-in-cheek. I understand those things have reasons that they exist. I get it. I've been involved with some of them for a long time. But technically speaking, it's not like the vessels that we're talking about here in Daniel chapter 2. So, or Daniel chapter 1, verse 2. So we're asking the question, is there a danger in getting this value issue wrong? Is there a danger in getting the value issue wrong? Or, as it is linked to the first question, are there no... Sorry, lost my train of thought. Are there no consequences if I mess this up? Is it up to me to declare value about all kinds of stuff, or do I have the right to? Can I declare value, or do I have to subject myself to something else? That makes sense? Let me give you an example. There was a time I attended a philosophy discussion group in my town. I stopped going because every month that these folks would gather in the basement of our main branch of the public library in Scranton, it would go like this. They would democratically decide what we were going to talk about. Well, that's okay. What we're going to discuss for an hour and a half, and every discussion ended with, and that's why Christians are the stupidest people on the planet. Every single one. And try as I might, I could not speak into that, and there was just a level of intellectual dishonesty there that I couldn't overcome. And so wisdom sometimes is the better part of valor. You just need to know when to shake off the dust and walk away. Because in some, this is free. Sometimes in situations like that, you can do those people more good going home and getting on your face and begging God to help them than you can confronting them. Sometimes. You just need to know the difference, right? But I did attend for a while, and one night they decided they wanted to talk about asking the question, is there any such thing as objective moral duties and values? That means, is there a standard, a universal standard that all people are held to? And if so, where does it come from? All right, now we're talking. I can talk about that all day. And I can give you more reasons, well, because the Bible says so, right? We can talk about that. In fact, I love it when I get an opportunity to teach the ethics class at college. I love doing that. So I'm arguing that yes, there is an objective standard, and yes, we can all know it because there's an objective lawgiver. Now, what does objective mean? Objective means it can be either true or false, but it cannot be both. Something that is subjective, well, I like that painting, well, I don't. All right, well, that's subjective. You can both hold that opinion. Do you see the difference? So, but if we're talking about objective, like, is it always objectively wrong to torture babies for fun? Or any other reason for that matter? Yes. Right? You should say yes. Please. Where am I? Right? Is it always wrong to torture babies? Yes. Why? Well, it's always wrong. Why? Okay, so that's the conversation. So I'm going with, well, there's a moral lawgiver, and I have my reasons for that. And, of course, I'm the only person in this room who holds that position. There is a young woman sitting to my left who is very angry that I would suggest that there is a God who could tell her what to do. Have you ever met a stark, raving fundamentalist? Like, they think their mission is to beat Jesus into people with a 40-pound Thompson Chain Reference Bible. Like, well, you're going to heaven. It kills you, wham, right? So she's like that, but she's the polar opposite. Spittle is actually coming out of her mouth. She's so angry. I've met very few atheists who are that angry. I've met a lot of atheists in my time in the classroom, but not like that. And I'm trying to figure out, well, how do I get in here? Like, how do I help her understand? So while she's just screaming, I look down and I see that her right foot is about 18 inches from my left foot, and between our 2 feet is her purse. Now, what I'm about to tell you, don't ever do this. And this really happened. So while she's screaming, and it's got a big banana-shaped zipper right across the top, very convenient. So I pull it over very deliberately. Oh, and I prayed a little prayer before I began this, and it was very simply, oh God, let her see this before it goes too far. In Jesus' name, amen. And I pulled it over, and I very slowly, just one set of teeth at a time, I started unzipping it. Now, guys, you would never touch another woman's purse, would you? Some of us in this room break out into hives when our wives are upstairs getting ready, and they very innocently holler down to us, honey, could you bring me my phone, please? Oh, no. Where is it? In my purse. No! What pocket? The front one. Like, there's only one, right? I don't like going into my wife's purse without rappelling gear, rescue flares, extra food. Who knows when you're getting out, right? So you just don't do that. Well, I'm about 1.5 inches in, and mercifully, all I see is darkness. And I'm going to have to amend her statement to me. I can't give you a direct quote. But she wanted to know what in the world I thought I was doing. So I put on my cheesy philosopher's grin. I said, I'm going through your purse. She said, you can't do that. Well, why not? Because it's wrong. Why? Because it's wrong. I said, well, listen, you've been arguing for the past 45 minutes that right and wrong is totally up to the individual. There is no objective value. You say it's wrong to go through your purse. I say it's right. I'm going through your purse. She said, but you can't do that. I said, why? And she finally said, because everyone knows that. And she literally put her hands over her mouth, zipped it up, pushed it back over. Are there objective standards or not? That's pretty mild as an objective standard, but speaks to the point. So we're going to look at two examples of dealing with what is really real, what is absolute. And the first is found in Daniel 4, in the story of Nebuchadnezzar. And for time's sake, I'm going to sum up some of this. So Nebuchadnezzar, let's just read some of this together. Chapter 4, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar, to the nations and peoples of every language who live in all the earth, may you prosper greatly. It is my pleasure to tell you about the miraculous signs and wonders that the Most High God has performed for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an eternal kingdom. His dominion, who or what is behind human history, endures from generation to generation. Who is writing this? Nebuchadnezzar. The biggest, baddest dude on the planet at the height of the Babylonian Empire, which is also close to its end, is a guest blogger in Daniel. I'm going to pick up at verse 13. So let me explain to you what is happening. So Nebuchadnezzar says he's at home, he's in his palace, he's contented, he's prosperous, and he had a dream that made him afraid, right? And this is not the first time. We're going to look at another one a little bit later on. And as some of you probably know, other Old Testament despots had dreams that they assumed meant something. Pharaoh, skinny cows, I mean, who wouldn't be freaked out by that, right? So there are other things. So he has this dream, and he has this dream of a great tree. And in his dream, the tree just is massive, and its branches are canopy, and its leaves canopy so many, and there are all these creatures of the earth that find homes there, and shelters there, and shade there, and sustenance and food all over. Verse 13. In the visions I saw while lying in bed, I looked, and there before me was a holy one, a messenger coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, "Cut down the tree and trim off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches. Let the stump and its roots bound with iron and bronze remain in the ground in the grass of the field. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven. Let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal till 7 times pass by for him. The decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict, so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on the earth, and gives them to anyone he wishes, and sets them over the lowliest of people." So in verse 17, you have both an absolute versus subjective issue, or an objective versus subjective issue, and who or what is behind human history. So this angel comes and says the tree's going to be chopped down for a purpose, so that the world will know that God reigns. This is the dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, had. Now Belteshazzar, tell me what it means, for none of the wise men in my kingdom can interpret it for me, but you can, because the spirit of the holy gods is in you. Verse 23. Your Majesty, the other verses are a summation of the dream again. Your Majesty saw a holy one, a messenger coming down from heaven and saying, "Cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stumps bound with iron and bronze in the grass of the field while its roots remain in the ground. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven. Let him live with the wild animals until 7 times pass by for him." This is the interpretation, Your Majesty, and this is the decree the Most High has issued against my Lord the King. You will be driven away from people, and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like ox, and be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 times, or 7 years, will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth, and gives them to anyone he wishes. The command to leave the stump of the tree with its roots means that your kingdom will be restored to you when you acknowledge that heaven rules. For those of you who mark, highlight, or underline in your Bible, get out your pens. Your kingdom will be restored to you when you acknowledge that heaven rules, not you. You are relative to this whole situation, Nebuchadnezzar. You are not the absolute. Therefore, your majesty, be pleased to accept my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. It may be that then your prosperity will continue. I love Daniel's postscript at the end of the interpretation. Well, you're pretty much done. All right, well, see you later. Right? But he says, your majesty, please listen to me. Be nice. Be kind. Maybe there is time. Maybe. Now, mind you, this conversation happens after the events of the fiery furnace. So he's already seen it, right? I'm going to megalomaniac. I'm going to build this great statue to myself. I'm going to order anybody who's anybody from the entire Babylonian Empire. This was a big deal to bow before it. The guy comes out. We have the praise band. They're going to hit the power chord. Wow, everybody drops. And there's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Not today, right? And that's when he says, I'm going to give you another chance. If not, I'm going to throw you in the furnace. Go ahead. We're not going to bow to you or your stinking image, so put that in your furnace and smoke it. But our God is able to rescue us, but even if he does not, we will not bow to you. You know the story. He heats the furnace 7 times hotter than normal, and you should ask normal than what? 7 times hotter than the temperature to melt gold, which would have been physically impossible. But all that means is I want them vaporized. In they go. The guards get roasted. We throw them in, and he's all proud of himself. He's like, wait a minute. We threw in 3. I count 4. And the 4th looks like a son of the gods. You guys, come out. I want to talk to you. Okay. Out they come. Wow, your God is awesome. I know, right? That's what we've been telling you. Right? We've been here for like 2 years now. I mean, come on. Hello? Been on the salad shooter diet for all this time. And then he sends out his decree. Anyone who says anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I will have them chopped into bits and their houses turned to piles of rubble. That, by the way, is Nebuchadnezzar's favorite altar call. You'll see that again. So he's already seen all this. And he has this dream, and so one of these 4 guys, whom he knows personally, comes to him and tells him what the dream means. He's been right before Daniel 2, and he's highly respected, and Daniel begs him to change his ways. Verse 28, all this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. So now it goes back to narration. All this happened to Nebuchadnezzar 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. He said, is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? Wow. Even as the words were on his lips, a voice came from heaven. This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. You will be driven away from people and will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives to them anyone he wishes. Immediately, Nebuchadnezzar goes through this terrible transformation, and there it is depicted by William Blake's Nebuchadnezzar 1795. Look at that. Read some commentary on this painting. I'm that kind of nerd. And it talks about, you can't see it as well, of course, through PowerPoint projection, but if you were to get really close or even come look at it on my computer screen, you see that there are green hues and almost like he's becoming non-human and turning into some kind of reptilian creature. His humanity was almost completely erased. Why? Because he absolutized the relative. Look at all I have done. I am the greatest. You are not. And you're going to learn a very hard lesson. At the end of time, verse 34, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven. So those of you who are marking in your Bibles, I want you to somehow connect verse 26 to verse 34. Verse 26, your kingdom will be restored to you when you acknowledge that heaven rules. There's verse 34, at the end of the time, I raised my eyes toward heaven. I was not looking earthward, I looked up. And my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases. With the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth, no one can hold back his hand or say to him, what have you done? Not only does Nebuchadnezzar pen part of Daniel, he writes a hymn. There it is. At the same time, my sanity was restored, my honor and splendor were returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisors and nobles sought me out. I was restored to my throne and became even greater than before. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right. All his ways are just, not arbitrary. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. Do you realize Nebuchadnezzar is in heaven? I got dibs at the marriage supper of the Lamb, by the way. Sitting next to him. We got all eternity, so just get in line. Think about it. His story ended pretty well. Chapter 5, however, does not. So the year that chapter 5 takes place is 539 BC. Daniel arrived in Babylon 605. So scholars, particularly Old Testament scholars, believe that Daniel is probably about 80 years old by this time. 80. Jerusalem has been destroyed, 586, right? So it's now 539. It's been almost 50 years since the fall of Jerusalem. King Belshazzar, which is not to be confused with Belteshazzar, although they're very close. King Belshazzar, who is Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. So there's a skip in time between chapter 4 and chapter 5. Daniel gives us history. He is not required to tell us every detail of that history, right? King Nebuchadnezzar gave a great banquet, 1,000 of his nobles, to 1,000 of his nobles, and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines, might drink from them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines, drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze and stone. This guy knows how to party. So he's lubed up pretty good, right? He's got some dancers down from Nineveh. They got it going on. They got a great country band in from the outskirts of Babylon, and they are partying their faces off like it's 1999. And in his drunken stupor, he comes up with a brilliant idea. Hey, we got those goblets sitting in a museum that we ripped off from the Jews. Let's drink out of those. Not good. And as they did so, they didn't say, look, what a beautiful vessel. As they did so, they drank the wine and they praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. There are a few things that will sober you up like that, right? So here they are, partying hard. Hand appears out of nowhere, and starts writing on the wall. This will get your attention. The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. That is what Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, and Daniel are studying to be, henceforth referred to as wizards. So he calls all these guys in because they're supposed to know about this stuff. And he said to the wise men, whoever reads the writing, tells me what it means, will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Well, you say, why is the third? Because grandma is still around. We're getting to her here in a second. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So King Nebuchadnezzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled. We don't know. Then the queen, or the queen mother, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. Now, I have a very strong youth pastor gene. I tend to think like an 8th grader. How many of you remember the 80s sitcom, The Nanny? Anybody remember that? Fran Drescher had a really annoying Long Island accent. And I'm nasally. I'm not going to do the voice for you, but I want you to listen for it as I read. I just, for fun, think that's what she sounded like, right? Maybe a phrase or two. So she comes in, may the king live forever, right? She said, don't be alarmed, don't look so pale. There's a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. We're going to talk about that later on. In the time of your grandfather, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, the wizards. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means. Well, you need this guy. Let's get him out of retirement. All right, well, go get him. So they go get Daniel. Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, is this true? Can you do all this? Verse 14, I've heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they can't do it. Now I've heard that you're able to interpret and solve difficult problems. If you can read the writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck. You will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. The amazing thing about Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah is not that they maintained a private faith in God. The amazing thing about these 4 boys, now an old man, still as an old man, and it's not over yet, Darius is coming, and we're not dealing with him tonight. Even as an old man, he's going to make a high-profile, public witness for God in a hostile environment. Then he answered the king, keep it. I don't want your stuff. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell you what it means. Now, again, in my sanctified 8th grade imagination, I see a pause between verses 17 and 18. See Daniel. Now, whether it was huge, kind of like that on like the palace wall. When I was a kid, I kind of pictured it like fitting on a 3x5 card. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But let's just assume that Daniel, in his aged condition, he's taking Centrum Silver and stuff. He's got to get close enough, and he's tromboning, trying to see it, and he reads it and just goes, okay, not good. I don't know if he smirks a little bit. I don't know. Or was he heartbroken? Is his voice quavering because of the power that is behind it? What would you do? Your Majesty, the Most High God gave your father Nebuchadnezzar sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and people of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. Those he wanted to promote, he promoted. And those he wanted to humble, he humbled. But when his heart became arrogant and hardened with pride, he was deposed from his royal throne and stripped of his glory. He was driven away from people and given the mind of an animal. He lived with the wild donkeys and ate grass like the ox, and his body was drenched with dew of heaven until he acknowledged that the Most High God is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and sets over them anyone he wishes. But you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all of this. Instead, you have set up yourself against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives and your concubines, drank wine from them. You praised the gods of silver, gold, and bronze of iron, wood and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand, but you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life in all your ways. And then he goes on to give the interpretation. It's just three words. One of them is repeated once. Mene, mene, tekel, parson. And he says, here's what it means. Mene, mene, twice. You've been measured carefully. Tekel, you have been found wanting as you're laid in the balances. And parson, tonight, this night, your kingdom ends. And it's interesting because the word parson, or Peres, can also refer to Persian. Without the vowel points. Could also be Persian. So it's a nice little play on words that God used there. Then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple, a gold chain was placed around his neck. He was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom, so he gives it to him anyway. So at least he keeps his word at this point. Give him that. But that very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. So, while Darius is partying, while Belshazzar is partying a lot, the Persians have already laid siege to the city. And you know what the Persian engineers had done? They diverted the Euphrates River. Isn't that pretty clever? That must have taken a few shovelfuls of dirt. They diverted the Euphrates River, which flowed right through the center of Babylon. And that very night, do you know how they got into the city? They walked under the walls, didn't fire a shot. Babylonian kingdom, over. So in these two stories, we see two immediate dangers. They are relativizing the absolute and absolutizing the relative. Now let's talk about ways that in sometimes universities we relativize the absolute, or some things that we have to look out for as well. It really began with literature, and particularly within the church in the late 19th century. Coming out of Europe, theologians started saying, well, we don't really think the Bible is the Word of God anymore. By the way, in response to that, in America, you had the rise of two groups, fundamentalism and Pentecostalism, to fight that. Fundamentalism in particular, by the way, I'm not an angry fundamentalist. Fundamentalism in particular did a good job of keeping that dragon at bay. But after that dragon was defeated, they had no one else to fight. And that's when they circled the wagons. And the Bible colleges started going up. Christian radio stations, bookstores. The culture became insulated and isolated. And Christianity retreated from the marketplace of ideas. True story. And it didn't just begin and end with the Bible, if that's not bad enough. It applies to all literature. How can we possibly know what any author really intends? How does the author even know what the author intends? You know what's hysterical? Is that there are writers who write books about that. Think about it. People who've written books saying, you can't really know what the author means. Okay. I'm just saying. All right? And so these are in ascending order of importance. Next one to go, history. We can't really know what happened. And you had movements like the epic things that swept through the world, like the Industrial Revolution, when the sciences really sat upon the throne. And a school of thought called empiricism, which said we can't know anything unless we can experience it. Well, how can we possibly know history? You cannot recreate any historic event. It's impossible. Do you realize that? I mean, actually take the people who are there and recreate it. You can't do it. I'm not talking about a bunch of nerds walking around with fake muskets. Frankly, I would do that. So we can't know what happened. We don't know what people mean. We don't know what happened. Next thing to go, facts. Facts don't mean anything. And in the past 3 years, you've probably heard more often than you want alternative facts. Alternative narrative. You pick the story that fits you and you step into it. These are all examples of relativizing the absolute, and probably the worst one, truth itself. The great king of the rational mind her enemies, or the queen of the rational mind, her enemies are attempting to subdue her and lay siege to her and take her out. And they've very nearly succeeded. If we do not stand for truth, who will? Let me remind you, just because you believe something does not mean you know truth. I will give you the same challenge that I gave my audience earlier this week. We must be a people who dare to think, which is not always easy. And if we're wondering, I know you wouldn't question if that's a big deal, but just to back up what I said, again, we can go back to Romans chapter 1. Before we get to the part about the created order itself speaking to the very divinity of God, in verse 18, Paul writes, the wrath of God is being poured out against those who suppress the truth. And what does Paul connect to truth? The gospel. In the first part of that chapter, coming into chapter 1, verse 16. All truth is God's truth. Or we absolutize the relative. Where do we see that happening? On campuses and in our sanctuaries. Our emotions, our feelings, our experiences. Well, I hear what you're saying, Pastor, but here's what I feel. And I really appreciate the fact that you care for us and you shepherd us, but I really can't shake my feeling. And feelings are very powerful things. By the way, if you're having a conversation with someone who's absolutized their feelings, do not begin by denying what they feel. That's bad. You're not going to win any friends or certainly the debate. So we've absolutized that. Another tenet of existentialism that we talked about in my class is this idea of existence preceding essence. Existence preceding essence that really came out in the French authors post-World War II. And what they mean is that you exist and then you become who you want to be. You decide. That's the theme of just about every Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks, Sony animation film. Anybody ever see the animated movie Zootopia? Theme of that movie. You can become whatever you want because the self has been absolutized. Very, very dangerous. So, if we expect our students to go off to college, if we expect to be effective witnesses in a crooked and depraved generation, we got to know the difference between relative and absolute. And we had better not draw the line where we think it should be drawn, but we had better be doing what James says and asking God for wisdom so that we know. Because, frankly, ladies and gentlemen, if I may be so bold, the American church has made some very terrible mistakes about what is absolute. I'm not about to make a list because somebody's going to get mad. Conversely, we are making huge mistakes about what is relative. All right, let's go back to Daniel chapter 1. We have a chance of finishing this material. Third question, who are you? And what we need to understand is that true identity is given, not self-made. So again, these are not in silos. There is a correlation here. You cannot absolutize the self and say, I can be whatever I want. No, you can't. Verse 3, the king ordered Ashpenaz, he's the dean of students, by the way, here in the University of Babylon, king of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. Do you think Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah learned what they were taught? You bet. And they were good. They didn't say, no, I'm sorry, I can't read this. I don't believe in it. It doesn't matter if you believe in it, you're getting assigned to read it. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, so it is an accelerated program. And after that, they were to enter the king's service. Now, let's talk about the literature and the learning of the Babylonians for a second. I want to share this concept with you. There is a hill called truth. When I began that MA program I told you about, and I talked to my professor, he said, no, just pick up with word 1 in Iliad. I cheated a little bit, and I discovered a book that I devoured and I've read several times. It's called From Achilles to Christ, Why Christians Should Read the Pagan Classics, by a guy named Louis Markos, M-A-R-K-O-S. From Achilles to Christ, Why Christians Should Read the Pagan Classics. Lou Markos is an English professor at Houston Baptist University. And so he's got some commentary on Iliad, Odyssey, a Roman epic called the Aeneid, and some Greek poetry. And in the introduction, he said, you know what, reader, there is a hill called truth. And at its summit is Jesus Christ and Him crucified. But we need to recognize that there are others who have attempted to scale that hill. And they don't get all the way up. The only way to get to the top is to fall in the blood-soaked ground on your knees before the battered Nazarene. That's it. But that doesn't mean we should ignore the others who've tried, because we could probably learn something. John Calvin says this, from this passage, which is, he's talking about Titus 1:12, where Paul is writing to Titus, who's serving on Crete. He's like, well, we all know Cretans are, well, Cretans. We may infer that those persons are superstitious who do not venture to borrow anything from heathen authors. All truth is from God. And consequently, if wicked men have said anything that is true and just, we ought not to reject it, for it has come from God. This is John Calvin. He's a pretty serious dude. Besides, all things are of God, and therefore, why should it not be lawful to dedicate to his glory everything that can properly be employed for such a purpose? You know what I think Daniel and his friends did? I think they're like, all right, we're here, we're going to learn, we're going to use this for God's glory. We're going to learn. Which leads us to a discussion of where does reason fit in the life of a Christian? Now, you probably have come across an idea or a person who had said that reason and faith have no compatibility. Nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. In fact, I don't think God is very pleased with that, because Jesus then misspoke when among the things we're supposed to love God with all of us, our mind. Right? So the Christian view is we use reason and we trust God. The non-Christian view is we use God and trust reason. We use reason and trust God instead of using God and trusting reason. A high-profile public witness for God in hostile environments does not include ignorance. Ignorance is not a Christian virtue. It is not. And not all of us, me included, because I'm just of average intelligence, are gifted as others. That doesn't mean we are now freed from a responsibility of learning. We are not. In fact, again, if we want to be high-profile public witnesses for God in a hostile environment, we're going to have to learn some stuff. And I think we must retake the intellectual high ground and stand unafraid in the marketplace of ideas. That means that we're going to have to learn to go beyond, well, because the Bible tells me so. Well, is the Bible authoritative? Sure. I confess that, absolutely. Why? Well, because God said it is. And how do you know that? Because I read it in the Bible. I don't disagree with any of those statements I just made. However, to someone who does not believe in God, sees any personal responsibility before him, that is called a circular argument. Or it's also called begging the question. Let us dare to think. And I've already talked to you about 2 Corinthians 10:5, so we're not going to go there again. Let's go back to the text. Among those who were chosen, verse 6, were some from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names: to Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief officials for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, "I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you." All right, so is it possible, ladies and gentlemen, that Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah could have maintained their faith in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, even if they ate the food that is coming from the king's table? Yes or no? Could they maintain their belief in God? Yes. Would they be living outside of the covenant? Yes. They'd be in violation. Now, a quick discussion there. We actually don't know what the deal was. The most reasonable idea is that this food was probably sacrificed to idols. And believe me, I'm going to show you a picture later on. The city is full of them. It is a very religious place. It's akin to Athens all those years later in Acts chapter 17, where Paul is going through the city. He says, "Men of Athens, I see in every way you are very religious. In fact, I've looked carefully at your idols of worship. And by the way, I found one dedicated to an unknown God." Awesome. What you have worshipped in ignorance, I'm going to tell you the one you missed. Great, right? So they are extremely religious, and so they're offering meat, wine to the idols. The Babylonian pantheon, you're going to meet some of those here in a couple minutes. Each had their own priests and priestesses, and that was their job. And of course, they're not going to waste that food, so they give it to the captives because the idols don't eat it, right? So they give it to the captives. I'm going to skip this. All right. So let's talk about their names. Daniel means God is my judge. his name was changed to Belteshazzar. May Marduk protect his life. Marduk is the chief deity of the Babylonian pantheon, the multiple gods of Babylon. Marduk is its chief. So Daniel's name, God is my judge, got changed to Belteshazzar. May Marduk protect his life. Hananiah, the Lord shows grace, gets his name changed to Shadrach under the command of Aku. Also kind of a big deal. He's like one of the original Avengers kind of deal as far as gods are concerned. We'll skip Mishael here, do him last. Azariah, the Lord helps, changed to Abednego, servant of Nebu, also a big deal. I wonder if Mishael was stung the most. His name meant who is what God is. In his very name, it's trying to capture the transcendent nature of God. He is something completely other, right? That's why Jesus becoming the God-man ought to still fill you with shock and awe. His name is changed to Meshach, who is or what Aku is. Oh. Now, I just picture them sitting in a class. They're in Mesopotamian History 101, and they're reading the Epic of Gilgamesh, which you're going to get introduced to here in a little bit. And they're reading it, and so their professor says, okay, pop quiz, what is the name of Gilgamesh's best friend in the Epic of Gilgamesh? And so Mishael knows that. The answer, by the way, is Enkidu. That's really an unfortunate name, but that's it. And so he raises his hand, and the professor calls on him, yes, Meshach. Just cringes. Every college or university on the planet, again, I don't care if it's the strictest Bible college that has ever, they don't even let their kids out in the sunlight kind of thing. All the way up to like a Brown University, or perhaps a little more locally, the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Every university or college on the planet is attempting to reorient the character of its students. They're trying to change their identities. The question is, into whom or what, and by what means? Every single one of them. The Babylonians, there is no real, at this time, University of Babylon, but the Babylonians are no different. They are attempting to reorient the identity totally of their captives. Siege warfare, this has been going on for centuries, and it happened all the way up through the Middle Ages. You'd bring tributes back, and it wasn't just you just kept them in a room and looked at them. There's a purpose for it. It kept your vassal state, or the one where they're coming from, kind of kept them calm, because you're far less likely to go attack the place that is holding your son hostage. So it kept everybody kind of calm. But then the other thing they would do is they would retrain them in the history, art, religion, political philosophy, everything of their new home, so that they could help rule the conquered people. And a lot of commentators think that not only were they trained, not only were their names changed, but they may have been emasculated as well and turned into eunuchs. Pretty severe. Every college or university on the planet is attempting to reorient the character of its students. The question is, into whom or what and by what means? Now, I can say I went to a college, and I was there a long time because I was a married student, that did a lot to orient my character toward Christ. It is because of my Bible college experience that I can easily flip from John to Plato. And I can talk about issues of light and dark in both, and I think that's great. So you say, what are they trying to turn me into? They try to turn me into a servant of the Most High God. By what means? His word. Good. Who or what? So I'm going to go through this a little more quickly, because of everything we've talked about, this is probably the most familiar to you, right? So So these boys say, we're not going to eat it. We're not going to drink it. Maybe it was sacrificed to idols. Maybe it was just breaking dietary laws. Maybe it was like pulled pork sandwich or, like 2 of them at once, a bacon cheeseburger. And they couldn't do it. So they're saying, no, we're not. Taking their life into their hands. And so the chief official says, do you want the king to have my head? That can't happen. And so they politely say, please, test us for 10 days. After 10 days are over, if we look bad, we'll do it. If not, we're going to keep up with this. So they eat water and vegetables for 10 days. They look better than everybody else. And for 3 years, they're on this diet. Culvers would be very difficult for them. 3 years. And they're boys who've had so much taken from them, figuratively, literally. No one's checking up on them, no youth pastor beating them over the head, no support group, on their own. Why could they do it? They know who or what is behind human history. They know what is real, and they know their names. I ask my students, and I ask you, when I teach this in my theology classes, what is your name? What is your identity? Are you the soccer mom? Are you Deacon Jones that has been a deacon since the earth was still hot? Are you a teacher? Are you a coach? You're a fireman, policeman, Indian chief? Is that your identity? For the church age Christian, it had better not be. That is not what you are. Is it a piece? Well, of course. Not that stupid. But it is what you do. Who are you? There may come a day, ladies and gentlemen, when the safety of what we know at church is gone. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to be real. I have a good friend who is the chair of philosophy at Western Michigan University. His dad was the chairman, or was the registrar at Baptist Bible College for 30 years, and this guy is one of my heroes. Christian philosopher, Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo. And he said he believes the day is coming, maybe in our lifetime, maybe not. Let's hope not. Where we will no longer just be called on to defend the truth of Christianity. We will be called on to defend its goodness because it's been outlawed. It's happened before. Not here. Read the book of Hebrews. It's happened before. Where will you find your identity then? What is your true name? Question everyone has to answer. And here's the really amazing thing before we move on to our last question. If these guys relied on personal experience, let's say they absolutized their personal experience, it would have been an abject disaster. But they didn't rely on merely what they believed or believed to be true. They relied on what they knew. Now, you think with me, how many people do you folks know who have left this church only, right here in central Wisconsin, because of a bad experience? That has nothing to do with theology, nothing to do with something that ultimately matters, but they had an experience. Here's the danger. And we will never understand our true identity. We will never understand who or what is behind human history, and we will never understand what is really real if we fall into the trap of always filtering truth through experience. you filter truth through experience, no two people, or it's possible that no two people could ever come up with the same explanation for the same experience. Take, for instance, two men whose friendship my ministry kind of gets its genesis from. J.R.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis. They both had very similar experiences between 1914 and 1918. They both saw death and destruction in the trenches of France during World War I. Tolkien got trench fever, sent home. Lewis got hit by shrapnel. His non-commissioned officer was blown up right next to him. Sent home. After the war, as they're recovering, those two men had very similar experiences and they had radically different interpretations. Tolkien walked away and said, you see, this is why we need God. Lewis walked away and said, you see, this is why there is no God. Till he met Tolkien, who helped him out with that. If we are a people who absolutize experience over truth, we are headed toward disaster. What we must do, and this is part of the Romans 12 issue of reorienting our thinking, being renewed in our mind. Instead of filtering truth through experience, we got to filter experience through truth. That is going to require asking for some wisdom. That's going to require doing a little bit of thinking. That's going to require not just going along with the flow. Personal experience alone would be an abject disaster. It's possible in a group of this size that there's somebody in this room who's on the precipice of disaster because you've had some experiences that aren't so great. Did you know, and I talked about this the last time I was here, so you may remember me saying this, that kind of argument, or why do bad things happen to good people, is the best argument against Christianity? Did you know that? It's not insurmountable. What do you do? All right, we're going to switch to the other PowerPoint there, gents, if you would, please. We have one last one here. All right, so we've kind of beaten this horse dead, but I'm going to say it again anyway. The amazing thing about Daniel and his friends is not that they maintained a private faith in God. The amazing thing about Daniel is that they maintained a high-profile public witness for God in a hostile environment. I want you to think about what was going through these guys' minds when they got to Babylon. Can you imagine? Imagine that you spend your whole life, you've never been outside of the city limits of Wisconsin Rapids. Can you imagine? You've never been to the bumbling metropolis of Wausau. You've never experienced the glory of Hoo-Hot. You guys been to Hoo-Hot? That's good eating. I know, right? Or Pizza Ranch. Anybody been to a Pizza Ranch? I ate there twice in a row by accident this past weekend. I don't want to do that again. Right? Babylon is the most technologically advanced city on the planet. They would have been completely overwhelmed with the technological advancements. According to Greek historian Herodotus, which is Greek for I make stuff up, he was known for embellishing. The city walls were 80 feet thick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15-ish. That's about half the thickness of the walls. Really? He said they're 320 feet high, 56 miles in diameter. Can you imagine? They would have been completely awed by the technological advancements. This is the place that has the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon, which unfortunately Nobody knows what they really look like. But I think it was Nebuchadnezzar, somebody who, maybe it was Nabopolassar, somebody had a wife who was from more of a tropical climate, and so they're in this arid place here, irrigated by the Euphrates, but still pretty arid. So she was homesick. I'll build you jungles that they hang from the walls. It's pretty awesome. The other thing that they would have been completely overwhelmed by is the near total idolatry of the city. In the upper right there, again, and this is an artist's rendering, okay? We had no drones taking pictures of Babylon 605, but that's an idea of what the ziggurat, that's with a Z, not cigarette with a C, that's what the ziggurat of Marduk probably looked like, the chief deity of the gods. All of them had temples all throughout the city that were interconnected. These boys would have been overwhelmed by that, by the fact that there are libraries and schools dedicated to astrology, astronomy, pharmacology, history, literature, law. This is an advanced civilization. It would be like living your life in never getting outside and not really seeing, not having TV, internet, radio in Wisconsin Rapids, and then getting invited to a Brewers game. And you're like, look at the sausages running around. That's my favorite part. I love that. Right? I want to walk you through quickly, just so, again, we don't lose the space-time issue here. Just a little bit more history. Abraham was born around 2000 BC, 4,000 years ago. 4,000 years ago. About the time Abraham was born, the oldest known copies of the book called the Epic of Gilgamesh are first seen showing up in bookstores. They didn't really have bookstores, but the first known copies of the Epic of Gilgamesh are known to have been circulating. Anybody ever suffer having to read that? High school? If you're not familiar with it, you will be in a couple minutes. Another book. It wouldn't surprise me if you haven't heard of it, but it's going to be important, called the Enuma Elish, about 500 years later. We're going to be talking about that. A Greek book called the Theogony by a dude named Hesiod. So the first name is a guy's name. The second book is Theogony, Hesiod. 700 BC. If you've ever seen or heard of the movie, whether it be the old cheesy 80s version or the updated version, Clash of the Titans, that's it. That's their playbook. Which, by the way, is still being retold today, and except for now, it's the Marvel Comic Universe or DC Comics. Some things haven't changed. Homer's Iliad, 750 BC. Daniel arrives in Babylon, 605, 15 years old, and Jerusalem is destroyed in 586. So just so you see a timeline. Now, let me tell you what's going on in Daniel chapter 2. And I'm going to paraphrase this because I'm running out of gas, and you must be too. So here's what's going on. Nebuchadnezzar has his first recorded dream here, and it freaks him out. Now, you can fact check me on all I'm about to say, but I'm going to give you the Giessman translation. So he's freaked out, and he's like, wow, that must mean something. So he calls in his advisors. He said, I've had a dream that has troubled me greatly. I need you to tell me what it means. And the advisors say, okay, how about you tell us what you dreamt? That'd be really helpful. And then we'll tell you what it means. Nope, not this time. In fact, I've firmly decided, if you cannot both tell me what I dreamt and tell me what the dream means, I'm going to chop you into bits and have your houses turned into piles of rubble. Favorite altar call. But if you can do it, I will reward you greatly. And they go, come on, man, just tell us the dream. And he said, no, because you guys, I'm tired of your tricks. This time, this is the way it's going to be. And I think the reason he says that is because I think they make stuff up. They must. Because in our fourth question, do you have access to the supernatural? They believe in the supernatural. They have no access to it. And they're using reason alone to interpret the king's dreams. They're making stuff up. Here's the difference between reason and revelation. You can use your reason by looking at me and making simple observations and being pretty correct about those observations. So if you look at the ring finger of my left hand, what is on there? Wedding band, you assume, right? So I have a plainish, it's got some kind of Tolkien-like script on it, because I'm that kind of nerd, all right? On my tungsten wedding band, on the ring on my left hand. So you know generally that men who wear a plain band on the ring finger of the left hand are, and you would assume because I've been invited to speak here at Calvary Baptist Church that I'm married to a woman, right? I'm not being a smart aleck, I'm serious, right? So using reason alone, you can figure that out. Is that wrong? Nope. That was the equivalent of general revelation. Simple observation. And we talked about Psalm 19, Romans 1. Revelation, however, there are certain things about me you will not know unless I reveal it to you. Could you assume that I have children? Sure. Do you have any way to know that? And if any of you say because you're bald and your hair is gray, we're not friends. Right? I can tell you that. I can reveal it to you. And how do you understand when I reveal it to you? By using your reason. They're using reason alone. They have no access to revelation. And so the astrologers, verse 10, the astrologers answered the king, "There's no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live here." So back in the beginning of verse 10, there is no one on earth who can do what the king asks. Are they right or wrong? They're right. Now, you're going, well, Daniel does. Well, don't ruin the story for everybody else, please. They're right. No one on earth has that knowledge yet. And Daniel, does he make it up himself? Nope. So the king says, that's it, off with your heads. And he sends the head of campus security, his name is Arioch, out to carry out the deed. And Arioch runs into Daniel, and he's like, "Oh, Daniel, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to kill you today, you and your goofy little buddies there." Daniel says, "Why?" And he explains it to him. And then it says that Daniel responds to Arioch with wisdom and tact. Not like a whiny snowflake millennial. Daniel then, again, fact check me, goes himself to Nebuchadnezzar. High profile, public witness, hostile environment. His head has been ordered to be separated from his shoulders, or some other fantastic way of killing him. That'd probably be too pedestrian for Nebuchadnezzar. And he goes to Nebuchadnezzar and he says, "Would you give me time to interpret the dream?" He doesn't tell us exactly what Nebuchadnezzar said, but I imagine he went, "Go ahead." Here's what happens. Daniel returned to his house, verse 17, and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends may not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Their first strategy is oftentimes our last defense. Now, if that happened in a college today, and these boys are there, I can imagine Hannah and I saying, "I know what we're going to do. We're going to create one of those pictures that we can superimpose over our Facebook profile picture, and it's going to be a Star of David, and we're going to raise awareness. The Jewish captives are not treated equally. That'll fix it." Maybe Mishael says, no. No, what we're going to do is we're going to create some really scathing hashtags. Hashtag never Nebuchadnezzar. Hashtag not my despot. That'll fix it. Or they would just transfer, which isn't really an option. Right? This, by the way, is the first recorded college prayer meeting. Like, did God have to answer them? Would God honestly, biblically, theologically have been glorified had they died that next day? It's going to happen again. Daniel 3. Go ahead, throw us in. I don't think they're happy about it, but they weren't going to bow. Verse 19, during the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, this is awesome. Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells within him. Just stop there for a second. Can you imagine these boys being ushered through the Ishtar gate? Unless they're different than any other captive, that's how they entered the city. Ishtar, chief goddess of the Babylonian pantheon. By the way, her special abilities are war and sex. Just saying. So in they go, and that hasn't survived. This is an archaeological recreation that I believe is in Germany. And you can see it is not to full size. See the person in the lower right-hand corner? Those are not 320 feet tall. Much shorter than that. Can you imagine going through these blue porcelain brick walls, and Nebuchadnezzar's name is on every brick? And they're emblazoned with golden dragons and griffins and eagles and lions. And as they're walking in, they look up and they see the great ziggurat of Nebu, of Aku, of Ishtar, of Marduk, and they see at the top this dark door, and they think, oh, what is hidden in the darkness? Daniel says, he reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in the darkness. And light dwells in him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we ask of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. How this has never been put to music, I have no idea. This is good stuff. I don't have time to walk you through so much more that I have, so I want to sum up a few things for you. Let me just put it up here just for fun. If I were a betting man, and I'm not, but if I were, I would go all in that 2 of those 4 books I'm certain that those boys read. You can read literature that those guys read. They are the Epic of Gilgamesh, although the covers look nothing like that, and the Enuma Elish. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the classic Mesopotamian hero myth. It is about a dude named Gilgamesh, who is a very powerful ruler. He ruled a city named Uruk about 600 years before the time that Abraham was born. Same basic county, if you will, where Abraham is from, where Abraham is called from. Gilgamesh was very powerful. And he was always kind of causing trouble. Nobody really liked him. So the gods are like, ooh, let's create a buddy for him. So they create this guy, Enkidu. And Enkidu and Gilgamesh go off and they have all kinds of great adventures. They go out and they chop down sacred trees in Lebanon. They kill an ogre. I mean, who wouldn't? And Gilgamesh, and by the way, Gilgamesh is a demigod. He's half human, half god. And he comes up with an idea. He's like, I'm going to die one day. Because demigods don't get to go reign in wherever the gods are. It's not Mount Olympus if you're Greek, right? He's like, I'm going to die. I got to figure out a way to live forever. So he goes on an epic quest, and he goes to ask a person that he thinks would know. You'll never guess who he goes to ask. According to the Epic of Gilgamesh, Pastor Austin, you remember from high school? Okay, that's fair. He goes to ask the survivor of the global flood. Gilgamesh goes, and his name is unpronounceable. I don't get it. He goes to ask Noah. He's like, so it's like this, he goes through all these journeys to get there. On the way home, I don't remember, Ishtar hits on him and he's like, nah, honey, I'm good. I don't need to go out with you. I got this thing I got to do. I got to get to where I'm going. So he gets all the way there and he says, tell me your story. How did you survive? And you know what the guy tells him? He says, well, here's the deal. The gods really hate us. They really don't like people. In fact, the only reason why they made people is because they were sick of making their own sandwiches. Giessman translation. They're sick of taking care of themselves, changing their own, like, undershorts, literally. Like, that's another thing the priests did. They're like, we got to change the God's clothes today. Sheets, getting their food and drink. They're like, we should do this. We're gods. And so one of the gods, maybe it was Nebu, I can't remember which one, said, hey, I got an idea. Let's create a race of beings that is like sentient, can make decisions, but let's make them so that they can care for us. Ooh, but let's make them flawed so that they die off. And so you learn that later in the Enuma Elish. I'll get to that in a second. And he said, the only reason why I survived is because one of the gods told me, hey, we've tried to wipe you out with famine, with disease, and this time we're trying to flood. And so one of the gods came and told me build a boat because he realized nobody's going to make his sandwiches for him anymore. Well, how do I get that? Eternal life. Oh, you don't. What? Nope. Go home. Dude. So he goes home. And he realizes, I will never have immortality. There is no life after this one. And death is terrible. So I'm going to make a name for myself now. The Iliad, which they may have read, it would have been in the press for about 50 years or so before they got to Babylon. I would think they would have it in a center of learning like that. I don't know. It's the same thing. It's about a demigod, a cheesed-off mama's boy named Achilles, who gets his girlfriend taken away, so he quits. This is during the Trojan War, which, by the way, lasted 10 years, all because of two people's insatiable lust, Paris of Troy and Helen of Sparta. Two. People are dying and being slaughtered for 10 years. And he quits. He's like, fine, I'll let the Greeks lose. In fact, he goes to his goddess mother, Thetis, and he's like, hey, can you convince Zeus to allow the Trojans to beat down on the Greeks, my countrymen? She's like, sure, he owes me one. So she goes and says, hey, Zeus, my son, he's not going to live forever. He's this poor demigod. He's going to die, and he's a whiny guy. So could you beat down the Greeks for a while? And Zeus says, okay, since you saved me from drowning. And then his wife/sister, ew, by the way, Hera, comes and seduces him and gets him to change his mind. Very same thing Plato points out in some of his writings, that the gods don't know what they're talking about. He's right. And so it's a story of a guy who realizes I can live to a ripe old age and no one will know my name, or I can be a great warrior and make a name for myself that will live on in infamy, and everybody in this room is familiar with the name Achilles. You may not know his story. That's okay. You know his name. They're the same thing. In the middle there, you have the epic of the Enuma Elish and Theogony. Those are creation myths. First is Mesopotamian, the other is Greek. They tell the same story about how the gods became gods, how they defeated those who wanted to be gods. In the Greek case, it's the Titans. How they created stuff, either by procreation or they had pre-existing material. And in the Enuma Elish especially, you learn how the gods infused man's DNA, if you will, with the blood of a traitorous god that they murdered so that man would die off. These are the things Daniel's learning. What did Daniel know? Well, in scripture that was penned, whether he actually read it or not, their oral tradition was far better than ours. He knew that when God created man, he created him good. He also knew that man's sorry state is his own fault. Another thing that they believed you can read about in the Enuma Elish is that death was just varying degrees of terrible. There was no resurrection. There was no reunification of the body with the soul. And you went to the underworld and you were fed clay and dirt for the rest of your existence. And the gods of the underworld would torture you. They believe there's gods above the earth and under the earth. Daniel knew there was one God who is sovereign over both heaven and Hades, hell. If I ascend to the heavens, you are there. If I go down to the grave, you are there. He knew that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had no pre-existing materials. And there's only one. And he spoke the entire universe into existence. Perhaps what Daniel thought, okay, this is a lot of stuff that we have no time for. After God has revealed the dream to him, here's what Daniel knew. I know that my Redeemer lives, or defender, and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh will I see God. Yeah, you Babylonians may believe that you're going to suffer as shades, as shadows, as spirits for eternity. I will not. That is not the end. I myself will see him with my own eyes. I and no other. How my heart yearns within me. His Babylonian friends would say, Belteshazzar, I hear your goofy friends calling you Daniel. That's strange to our ears. What does that mean? God is my judge. And their faces would go ashen. You must live in abject fear. I welcome it. The righteous man does not fear death. So he goes in to Nebuchadnezzar. Then Daniel went to Arioch. We're almost done. Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute, verse 24, the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, do not execute the wise men. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him. Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, I found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means. That's amazing. Why would Arioch risk his life? Maybe. Did God cause him to show favor? Sure. We've already seen that in chapter 1. Maybe it's because Daniel approached him with wisdom and tact. Back a few verses. Then the king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? Now what would you say? Yes, I can. I like my scholarship money, thank you very much. And this dream, FYI, is a big deal. Verse 27, Daniel replied, your wizards are right. No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about, but there is a God in heaven. Let that ring in your ears. No, king, no man can do what you want, but here's something I know that you have failed to understand yet. There is a God in heaven. He has told me your dream. I will interpret it for the king. Access to the supernatural. First action, not the last line of defense. So, do you think the enemy of God cares that we believe in God? Do you think he's going to try to convince us not to believe in God? Nope. You know why? He's too smart for that. That he saves for like completely stupid people. Well, I'm not really sure. Well, let me tell you there's no God. Okay. Right? He's not going to try to take away your belief in God. 2 Corinthians 10:5 doesn't say that there are strongholds set up against the belief in God. Knowledge of God. Do you think Satan cares that you hold certain things to be sacred? Nope. In fact, he hopes you hold sacred the wrong things. Do you think Satan cares that you identify as being a child of God? No. I think Satan is worried about that you have access to the supernatural. No. You see, what Satan knows is that frontal assaults rarely work. He's had thousands of years of practice. Did he just go up to Eve and say, hey, eat the fruit? Do it, 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 which, you know, is a way to get anybody, any guy to do anything. Right? So he just gets her to give a little bit. Did God really say? And immediately she's confused. Well, he said that we can't eat it and we can't even touch it. He didn't say that. Well, you know, the reason why he doesn't want you to is because he knows that you're just going to be like him. Oh, I'm missing out on something. It's a good tactic. So here we are in the 21st century. There's no forbidden fruit exactly like that. But all he wants to do is just tell us, just give a little bit. You can believe in God. You can go to church. You can do, what's the thing coming up, the fondue and flip-flops? Can I go to that, by the way? I like fondue. I saw your posters for that. You can still have fun at that. Have a good time. Yuck it up with your lady friends. But don't you think you, as the self, need a little more? Just give me a little. In the summer of 480 BC, Western civilization, as we know, it was on the brink of collapse. There's a guy, you've heard of him. He's in the Bible. His name is Xerxes. Got in his mind that he was going to finish what his father Darius could not. Darius of Daniel, Darius. You see, this is not in Daniel, but we have lots of, the great thing about this time in history is everything was like pressed into clay tablets, survived very nicely in the arid climate. Papyrus, not so much. So Darius is really ticked off because the Athenians, that's the Greeks in Athens, have been fomenting revolt in the western provinces of the Persian Empire. That's modern-day Western Turkey, the Ionian cities, the Ionian colonies of Greece over there. And they're like, hey, throw off the chains of the oppressor, be free. Well, that doesn't go over well with a megalomaniac like Darius. So he, in 490 BC, he crosses the Hellespont with a great army and lands at a small Greek village city called Marathon. And from there, he's going to march down into Athens, and he's going to burn it to the ground. Well, he's met there by the Athenian army and receives a welcome that he doesn't expect. The Athenians don't say, hey, we'll give you some time to set up. You guys let us know when you're ready. Now, while they're disembarking from the ship, the Athenians run at them full speed, and they completely rout the Persians, send them packing. So a guy, I think his name was Philippe, ran the 26.2 miles, from Marathon to Athens. And when he got there, he said, Nike, Nike. You would pronounce it Nike, Nike. And then he died, which only proves running kills. So 10 years later, Xerxes says, I will finish what my father started. We're not messing around this time. In the book of Esther, chapter 1, you would read that Xerxes had a 6-month-long party. That's impressive. And what Esther doesn't tell you, but what he's doing is that he's assembling the largest army the world has ever seen. According to Herodotus, again, whose name in Greek means I make stuff up, said that the Persian army numbered 2 million men. And according to Herodotus, they would drink rivers dry. And Herodotus ordered a pontoon bridge to be built across the Hellespont, the most narrow part of the Aegean, the north bit between Asia and Europe. First one failed. He killed those engineers, whipped the water, literally, for defying the king. Got some new engineers who checked their plans more than once, built a new one, and he marched his entire army, all of the baggage, all of the everything over to Greece, and he's going to burn Athens to the ground. And he's going to erase the idea of self-government and human freedom. And he actually does burn Athens to the ground. And after that, he gets sent packing. But before that happens, there is a king in a southern state called Sparta. And his name is Leonidas, and he said, we are not going to stand for this. We need to put together a defense, and we need to meet the Persian, and we need to kick him out. And Xerxes chose 480 BC on purpose in the summer, one, because that's when the time when kings went to war, and second, it was the time of the Pan-Hellenic Olympic Games. If you think sports, like think the Packers, are a religious thing, you have no idea compared to the Greeks. They weren't going to give up their sports to go defend their land. They're like, well, we got the javelin throw in like an hour. Can I do it afterwards? So Leonidas said, all right, because of Greek law, because of Spartan law, we can't march the whole army, but I'm going to take 300 of my chosen bodyguard, and we will meet the Persian, and we will stop him long enough for you guys to finish up your chariot races, get your act together, and boot his butt back to Persia. So they set up the only place where this massive army could get through the mountainous eastern side of Greece down into Athens at a little mountain pass called Thermopylae, which is Greek for hot gates. And when they finally met, the Greeks and some of their allies, it wasn't just 300, the Persians had never seen discipline like this before. The Spartans were the greatest fighting force the ancient world had ever seen. They did not fight singularly, they fought together as one man, driven by freedom, whereas Xerxes' men were driven by the whip. And so we are told that Xerxes had a throne set up above the battle space, and for days he watched his best men be slaughtered. A group of 10,000 called the Immortals. He watched them be slaughtered day after day, and he knew it would only be a matter of time, but he was so impressed with the skill and fighting acumen of the Spartans that he offered a rare chance of clemency. And we do not know many things that were said in the battle. We know that one Greek said to another before they got there, "We heard that when the Persian fires his arrows, they fire so many at one time that it blocks out the sun," to which the reply was given, "Good, then we shall have our fight in the shade." So this is the kind of people these are. So we are told that after a few days of slaughter, and again, Xerxes knew it would end soon, but he hollers down to Leonidas through an interpreter. He says, "Leonidas, I'm very impressed with you and your men. There is no reason for you to die here today. It is not your lives I want, it is your weapons. Lay them down. Live on to fight another day. What say you?" Leonidas looked up at the king, made eye contact with him. He is begrimed with the soil and guts of his enemies, smeared from head to toe. We are told that he looks up at the great king and he offers a two-word reply, "Molon labe," which is Greek for "come and get it." You want it, you come and get it. What if we didn't just believe the right things, but we attempted to know the right things? And every time the enemy approaches us, not in a frontal assault because he knows better, but trying to get us to do things like, "You know what, my experiences are pretty strong. I think I'm going to filter my truth through my experience because I think I'm going to better understand it." He says, "Yeah, why don't you do that? Why don't you give up what that God has told you? What if you stand your ground, square your soldiers, and you say, 'You come and get it. I'm not giving it to you.'" 4 junior high-aged boys withstood an empire. By record, one of them did it with 2. What do you know? What are you willing to learn? Thank you so much for allowing me to come. I'm going to turn it back over to Pastor Austin.
I do hope that you hang on to much of what you heard tonight. My guess is you won't hang on to all of it. You now feel like everybody that has ever gone to Faith Church in Lafayette for a week and had that intense teaching time. It's something like this where it goes on like that. But I'm always challenged when I think about the strength of character from young people without parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, normal groups around them to remind them of truth, remind them of what they've been told. And they made a difference. They were willing to make a difference. They were also willing to expend their lives that way. Before we go tonight, I'd ask that you at least mentally think about Faye Obgardle in Mali. Right now, we've got elections coming up there that are always a crazy thing, but she had sent word that there have been some protests going on, so that little anger and all of that kind of stuff. And I think, did you say there's more planned for tomorrow too? More planned that has been announced that way. So if you remember to pray for not just her safety or the safety of the believers there, but that Christ's people would be able to make a difference with those that they're rubbing shoulders with. I know she would appreciate that, and we'll trust God to work his plan that way. Andy, thank you very much. This is a huge gift you gave of your time after the week you've had already, and then expending 3 hours and a little more for us. If you've not even glanced at that table back there, please do so. And you'll have to do so briefly or quickly, probably, but at any rate, we appreciate you coming tonight. Thank you. You are dismissed.